Okay, so for this next video lecture, so this is about module number 5 entitled Audit Planning. Okay, so for the overview of the contents of this module, so we will be discussing about the audit planning as part of the audit process, which is usually done in the beginning of the audit work, and which is also and can be modified during the actual audit or during the course of the conduct or the performance of the audit engagement if it needs to be revised. So for the learning outcomes, we have the following. First is to demonstrate understanding of the audit planning, audit strategy, audit risk, and audit program, as well as the understanding of the senior auditor's supervision of his members, the use of the work of an expert, as well as the internal auditors. And lastly is to explain the concept of materiality. For the contents, so we have the following. Okay, audit planning, audit strategy, timing and extent of direction and supervision of engagement team members, and the review of their work, concept of materiality, audit risk, consideration in the use of the work of an expert, consideration in the use of the work of an internal auditor, and audit program. So for this first video lecture, for module number 5, so we will be discussing about audit planning. Okay, so we will begin with the discussion. Okay, so according to PSA 200, which is redrafted, planning an audit of financial statements is required or requires the auditor to plan the audit work so that the audit will be performed in an effective manner. So basically, in all types of endeavors, planning is very essential, especially in the beginning of the performance of any work or objectives that one will have to achieve after the performance of a certain task. So here, planning will help the auditor in establishing the procedures that he will follow, that should be in accordance with PSA as well, and he may be able to formulate strategies on how to perform such procedures, and he may also consider the difficulties that he might be facing, and therefore he has already the remedy or the answer on how to resolve such difficulty. Okay, so especially planning is very important because this will serve as a guide or a map in the conduct of the audit engagement. So planning, basically this is referred to developing a general strategy and a detailed approach for the expected nature, timing, and extent of the audit. So just like what we have mentioned a while ago, so this will serve as the guide or the map in the conduct of the audit engagement. So the nature and extent of planning will vary according to the size of the entity, depending on the complexity of the audit, the key engagement team members' previous experience with the entity, and any changes in the circumstances that occur during the audit engagement. Okay, so that's why planning does not only vary according to the nature and complexity of the audit. Planning can also be changed from the beginning, during the conduct of the audit engagement, and even in approaching the end of the audit. So depending on the situation, or if it necessitates or the circumstances or the instances necessitates it to be changed. Okay, so that is the feature of planning. So planning also is done continuously throughout engagement. So as what I have mentioned earlier, because there may be changes in the conditions or there are unexpected results of the audit procedures during the course of the audit. Okay, so again, planning is subject to change from time to time if it is necessary to do so. So prior to the identification and assessment of the risks of material misstatement, the auditor should also consider the following matters during the planning stage of the audit. Okay, so first is the analytical procedures to be applied as risk assessment procedures. So basically, here in the planning stage, he or the auditor will now establish the procedures on how he is going to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidences. So here, from the beginning or even before the audit engagement has started, so he can already determine what types of procedures he is going to use, okay, or apply, and especially in this case during the risk assessment. So risk assessment is done, okay, to determine the acceptable level of risk that is that can be present and can be acceptable, and this is where the auditor will conduct the procedures to minimize this risk below the acceptable level. Okay, so that's how it is done. So another thing that he should consider also in the planning stage is the legal and regulatory framework that is applicable to the entity and how the entity is complying also with the framework. So with this this observation, okay, so the auditor can preliminarily have the idea if the financial statements is indeed prepared in accordance with PFRS, because here he will know if the framework or the standards that they are following are suitable and if they are indeed complying with such standards. Okay, so with this information at hand during the planning stage, so the auditor will now have somewhat a picture of what will be, okay, the course of his audit, okay, because it will give him the idea already of what is existing, okay, in the entity. Okay, another consideration is the determination also of materiality, because again, this is very important since the auditor will only gather evidence that is considered to be material. So those are the evidences that he needs to compile to support his audit opinion or expression of his opinion. Okay, another is the involvement of experts and the internal auditors. So in this case, if you could still remember in our previous video lecture, so we have mentioned that in the case where the auditor is not able, okay, to determine a certain nature of the entity, so he may need the help of the expert, because again, the auditor is not an expert of everything, okay, so he needs to be guided as well and be aided with others who have the mastery and expertise for a particular area, okay, in which he is not good at, in order for him to be guided, especially in the gathering of the audit evidence as well as the expression of his opinion later on. So that's why he needs to use or consider the use of an expert or the internal auditors. Okay, however, as we go along, we will discuss, okay, each of this involvement later on. Okay, so the next consideration is the performance of other risk assessment procedures. So if, for example, um, one type of audit procedure for risk assessment do not satisfy, okay, the auditor, so he may perform other risk assessment procedures. Or if, for example, if he found out that the internal control is not effective, so therefore he will not rely on those controls anymore, so he will do the substantive procedures thoroughly. Okay, so another is to enhance the effectiveness of the planning process. So the engagement partner and other key engagement team members should also be involved, so as their participation in the discussion among engagement team members would assist the consideration of the susceptibility of the financial statement. So in this case, most likely in an audit engagement, it is done by a team, okay, of auditors. So here they will be discussing about the planning process. So they will brainstorm the considerations and the factors that they need to include in the planning stage or process. Okay, so that they will be able to consider, okay, and more likely assess, okay, the susceptibility of the financial statements of the entity. Okay, so the adequate planning of the audit work will provide many advantages, okay, because number one, planning will help ensure that appropriate attention is devoted or will be devoted to the important areas. So meaning, as of the beginning of the audit or even before it has begun, so the auditor have already considered the important areas in which to include in the audit process. Okay. Another is planning will help also identify and resolve potential problems on a timely basis. Okay, because again, it will serve as a map or guide in the course of the conduct of the audit engagement. Okay, so another advantage is planning will permit the auditor to work properly, organized, and managed so that it is performed in an effective and efficient manner. So this is, as mentioned earlier, this serves as a guide for them on what to do, what is the next step that they will perform, okay, what to gather, where to gather, and so on, so that the conduct of the audit engagement will be effective and efficient. So another advantage is it will assist in the selection also of the engagement team members, which has the appropriate levels of capabilities and competence. Because in this case, during the planning stage, since the auditor will now identify the areas to be considered, so he can choose the team members that he will include, okay, in the audit, which has the competency and the capability that is suitable, okay, to the nature and type of audit engagement that they will perform. Okay, another advantage is planning will facilitate the direction and supervision of the engagement team, okay, and review their work. So this is also the same with that of what we have mentioned or discussed, that planning is like a map or a guide that is used by the auditor. Okay, another advantage is planning helps in the coordination of the work also that will be done by the expert or internal auditors. So here, since the auditor will now identify the areas that will be included, so he may have already the idea that some areas may need the support or the help of an expert or internal auditors in which the auditor himself is not very good at. Okay, so we will discuss that again in the next slides or video lectures. Okay, so after the overall strategy has been established, okay, so this is, or the strategy is part of the audit planning, because during the planning, the auditor can actually formulate strategies. So in this case, if these are established, the auditor should develop and document the overall audit plan to describe the detailed scope and conduct of the audit. So this is very important because they will use it again as a map or guide. So while the record of overall audit plan needs to be sufficiently detailed to guide the development of the audit program, so its precise form and content will vary again depending on the entity. Okay, as what we have mentioned earlier, it will also depend on the complexity of the audit, the specific methodology and technology that is used by the auditor, even the technology that is used or implemented in or by the client. So, an audit plan should also describe the following matters. Okay, so this should include the nature, timing, and extent of planned risk assessment procedures. What else? The test of controls and substantive procedures, as well as other planned audit procedures that are required to be carried out so that the engagement will comply with the PSEs. Okay, so this is how important audit planning is in an audit engagement.